Hello and welcome. We're going to give everyone a few minutes here to get into the webinar. Welcome, welcome. All right, it looks like our waiting room folks have made it over. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this live conversation with Anthony Bidulka, author of Going to Beautiful, for the Together We Read Canada event. My name is Joe Skelley. I'm on the marketing and events team here at Overdrive, and I'm the host of the Professional Book Nerds podcast. I'll be your MC today, and if you're ever looking for more author interviews or book recommendations, be sure you check out Professional Book Nerds wherever you listen to podcasts. I want to take a moment here to welcome Anthony to the conversation. Anthony, hello.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Joe.
We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you for being here.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
To kick us off, can you give everyone an overview of Going to Beautiful?
Yeah, I certainly can. So, Going to Beautiful revolves around two characters, Jake Hardy and Eddie Kravitz, a couple who live in Toronto, Canada, and they kind of have the perfect life. Jake is a celebrity chef. Eddie is a clothing designer. They have this big, beautiful life. They've got a dog, they've got a son, they've got lots of friends, and they throw these great parties. And that's how we first meet these two. And then a tragedy happens, and Eddie Kravitz loses his life. And that's kind of was the genesis of the book to begin with, where I had kind of had a loss in my own life, and I think that's kind of put me in that space. But I knew I didn't want to write about that loss. I wanted to write about the journey through the loss and how you sort of end up somewhere positive. And that's really what Going to Beautiful is. I see it as this journey from the depths of some of the toughest things that we can go through as people, to the highs of joy and finding new beginnings. So the story basically follows Jake as he first tries to deal with the loss of his spouse, and how do you do that. And eventually he is led to Eddie's hometown of beautiful Saskatchewan. It's in the middle of the Canadian prairies. It's wintertime, and he doesn't really know why he's going there. He just knows he has to go there. And he makes the trip with his good friend Baz, and the two of them find themselves one wintry day in beautiful Saskatchewan, and they are confronted with what seems to be a ghost town. They're confronted by this group of people who at first may have seemed unwelcoming. And then the story basically takes you through the days and experiences that they have, that take them from feeling this tragedy so deeply in their hearts to feeling joy. And that's
That's,
basically what the book's about.
I mean, that's such a beautiful way to put it. Looking at processing your own trauma and feelings and emotion through writing, was this the first time that you found yourself using your art as a way to process?
I don't know that it was the first time, but I think it was the most significant and
Mm,
dramatic time. So I had lost my sister, and I had lost her right about the time that book previous to Going to Beautiful, a book called Set Free, came out, and which of course threw everything into disarray. I I think the thing that I really learned about myself at that point is that I'm a writer that needs to write from a place of joy. And because I had really no joy left at that point in my life, I found I couldn't write. And it was the first time in my career, which, by that point I'd been writing for, 15, 16 years, but it's the first time that I ever experienced anything that maybe could have been described as writer's block. Like, people had asked me about that before, and I went, no, no, I've never had writer's block. But I couldn't write. There was no joy to pull from. And I struggled with that for a while, and then eventually thought, you know, Tony, you just got to live through this and let inspiration come when it wants to. And through that process, we eventually kind of ended up in this period of collective grief when we all went through the pandemic.
Mhm.
And I remember at that point just thinking like, wow, this is just so much to deal with for all of us. And I started getting the feeling that I wanted to write again, but I knew I didn't want to write about the pandemic,
Sure.
but I wanted to write about what I was reaching for, which was joy. I was trying to find my way back to joy. And that was the very first inklings of this book and how do I do this? And I wanted to write something that was going to end up in joy, that hopefully would, be a bit of a tonic for all of us as the pandemic hopefully would be ending.
Mhm.
And so the actual first name of this book was Beautiful Prairie Rainbow Retirement Inn. That was the first basic
Huh.
concept of the book. Now, a bit of a mouthful for, for a title, didn't quite roll off the tongue, but that was the idea. Like I knew about this place, this bricks and mortar place that I thought encapsulated everything that I thought was joyful. My love for the prairies, my love for the LGBTQ community, and my love for small towns in Saskatchewan. So I thought, let's start there. I'm going to start with a tragedy at the beginning of the book, and I am darn well going to end up someplace happy at the end. How do I get there?
Absolutely. We are going to find our way to beautiful in more ways than one by the end of it.
Exactly.
Now, thinking of all of that, what is you've been writing for so long, what is your favorite and least favorite part about writing?
Good one. I think favorite
Mhm.
is the first creative months when I've got the idea that I just know in my heart and my soul and my brain, like this is good. And I may
Sure.
not know any of the details yet, but I think, aha, like this is this little ball of an idea that I can spend time to work on and that creative process of, and I'm a planner. I used to be a CPA in my career, so I'm an organized guy. So I like planning the story. I like doing outlines. I like to create the character arcs and really know my characters, and that process is fun for me. I also, which I think some writers might disagree with me, I do like the editing process when
Oh,
after I send in the work and eventually it comes back from the editors. And I remember early on in my career thinking, what I've written is just so perfect. I mean, what could they possibly want to change? And then this big document comes back with cross outs and red X's, and I'm thinking I was horrified. And
sure.
I quickly realize that relationship with an editor is one of the most important relationships because we both want the same thing. We want the best book possible at the end of the day. And having that view of someone outside of the little circle of me and my computer is important, like these fresh eyes to look at something and not necessarily say to change it or say this is bad, but just let's think about this or let's discuss this or why did you make those decisions? Uh, and I learned about myself when I first get that document, that editorial document. I read it and then I put it away for a period of time and let the steam, stop coming out of my ears, and really think about what they have said to me or asked of me. And then I make decisions. I make decisions about which are the arguments that I think are worthwhile to have. And I only call them arguments, not in an adversarial, but in
Right.
in a way that here are things that we need to discuss back and forth. And I feel really strongly about this, and I want to push what I want to do here versus me going like, oh, yeah, nope, you're right about that. Let's change that. Let's change that. This isn't that important. This can go, this can stay. Um, so I like those two parts. As far as the part of the process that I don't like, hmm, I think there are points when I'm going over like draft 3 or 4, and it feels like I've just read this book so many times that I don't know that I can read it one more time. Those points can maybe get a little um, I don't even
Get
know
a
how to
little
describe it.
tiring,
Well, yeah,
perhaps.
yeah, maybe so. So I think that's maybe something I'm not crazy about. Um, yeah, I other than that, I mean, it's just I just love what I do so much. Everything from the creating to the editing to the marketing to the doing events. I just love all of it.
I think that's what comes across in your writing. There is such a level of authenticity. And I think the fact that you're always coming from a place of joy, but building off of either experiences that you have lived through or processing and sharing a bit of yourself. I think that really makes for these compelling stories to come out. Thinking on your process being very organized and process driven and focused, how long would you say you spend, maybe even just on the before it heads to the editor phase, and then how long would you say a whole book packaged up takes?
Yeah, in general, I
Mhm.
would tend to say a book from the very beginning to the very end
Mhm.
is, anywhere between 8 to 12 months. And
Okay.
typically, twice in my career, I've written in series. So my first series was 8 books long, and a book came out once a year, and that worked well for me and what I need to do. And the same thing with I'm currently working on a trilogy, and a book is coming out once a year, and that tends to be right. So as long as there's no, tragedy that's making me stop,
Of
as it
course.
did with this book, that tends to be my time frame. As
Mhm.
far as how I divide it up, I would say that, I'm usually trying to get a manuscript to my publisher, you know, at least, 6 or 7 months before what our anticipated release date is. So that basically means that I'm working for, 3, 4, 5 months on the creation of a book, and I'm the type of writer who I don't like to send anything out until it truly is the best that I think I can do without any professional help.
Mhm.
Because I'm still, even after 15 books, I'm still waiting for that day when instead of an editorial document, they just call me and say, Tony, it's perfect.
You know what? No
Know
notes
that'll
this
never
time.
happen, but that is my goal. Trying to make it as clean as possible, and because I respect the time of my publisher and the editors, and I want to give them as clean a document as possible. And then once that is is done, you run into the whole period of course, the editorial process and then the marketing process, which for me is a really important part of this career. And I think one of the reasons why I think even though some people might think that having been an accountant, a CPA, and a writer are two very different things, I have found them to be very complementary because
Mhm.
this is a business. And part of what I knew as a CPA was about marketing and how, you can write the best book in the world, but if no one knows about it, how good a book is it after all? So I spend a lot of time on the marketing aspects of things and asking my publisher for a lot of things, asking them for like hundreds of things, and hopefully I get a few of them.
And I'm sure they're happy to do it. Working in marketing myself, I get it.
Yeah.
It's always easier when someone is saying, "Hey, I really want to be a part of this as well. So give me
Yeah.
everything you want to so I can run with it."
Yeah. And I have found, Joe, that even though there's a lot of people in the machine of getting a
Mhm.
book out, really at the end of the day, no one is going to wake up every morning thinking, how can I sell another Anthony Bidulka book more than I will? Like
Exactly.
I have to be,
You have to be your number one salesman.
yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
I think so. Yeah.
If you were to condense the knowledge that you take from understanding business and understanding writing, if there are people who are listening right now who want to try their hand at getting a story out of their head, what's the advice you would give to a would-be writer?
The number one piece of advice that I give, right, I'll give you two real important
Hmm.
ones. The number one is be open to the possibility that you may not be the type of writer you think you're going to be.
Sure.
And by that, I mean, um, when I started, I thought I was going to be a very serious thriller writer.
Mhm.
And that was the very first book I wrote. That's what it was. And I sent it out to, a bunch of publishers and agents and what have you. And while I waited for that, I wrote this, mystery that was, kind of humorous and lighthearted and just full of stuff that came from my life. And it was just a lot of fun to write. And I was so certain that was not my future that when I was done that book, I still hadn't gotten the $1 million contract for this serious thriller. And I thought, well, I guess I'll throw out this little mystery. And I was so certain that wasn't my future that I put it out under ridiculous nom de plume. And immediately my mailbox was full of responses to the mystery. And
Of
I
course.
became a writer much different than the one I thought I was going to be. And I think just the fact that I was open to that allowed me to do all the things that I've done in the 20 years since. The second most important thing I would say to would-be writers is to ask yourself one question, and that is, why do I write? And
Mm,
it that's not as easy a question to answer as you might guess, and it can be complicated by the fact that the answer can change over time.
of
And it
course.
took me decades to really come up with a concise answer to that question. But once I did, the power that comes from that, because every time that you are tested in your writing career, and you will be tested often, you just go back to that why, and it just solidifies what you're doing and answers a lot of questions.
Important to find what fuels you. I think that's such great advice. Considering the directions that you have written, from twists and turns and thrills to humor and joy, how do you ground yourself at the end of a long writing day when you're writing a traumatic scene, when you're finding yourself maybe in a place that you haven't been for a while or hope to never be in? How do you get yourself back to Tony at the end of the day?
Yeah. It's not always the easiest thing.
Mhm.
And yet I think, I mean, you hit on something earlier, Joe, about how, I do write from joy and humor. And I think how my characters often respond to tough things is really how I respond to tough things too. I move towards humor, I move towards
Mhm.
optimism, and I move towards joy. Those are things that are important in my life. And I think just for whatever reason, part of who I am. I mean, I always do warn, my husband and my friends that when I'm in those first months of creating a book, I likely will be distracted even when I'm not writing, because part of my process, especially when I'm doing a draft one, even after my writing day is done, I am finding that I'm thinking about it throughout the rest of the day. When I go to bed, I'm thinking about it so that when I wake up in the morning and I sit down at my computer, I'm not thinking anymore. I'm going because I've thought it all through.
Right.
So I think that part is always percolating in the process. But as far as dealing with the tough things, because when you write crime novels, as I do, you are you are dealing with some tough issues, and you're dealing with characters who are going through some of the toughest things they may ever go through. And I often write from the perspective of a detective in a number of my series, and they, I think they're very much like me in that they will take themselves down a road and then they will try and find either some humor or some joy to sort of help themselves. And I think one of the reasons that Going to Beautiful is the book it is, the way it is similar to many of the other books that I write, is that that main character, Jake Hardy, has these people around him, this satellite of people that he either had before or he starts pulling into his world because he knows that's what he needs to make himself feel better. And if I were to look at my library of books that I've written, that's a common theme. That's how the people that I write about, that's how they deal with things.
Absolutely. No, that makes complete sense. Thinking of the satellite of characters surrounding, um, what was it like to create Baz? He always stands out to me. There's just a level of fun and humor, but also to know you have that kind of that level of, I don't know, compatriot is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so for anyone who maybe doesn't know about who Baz is in Going to Beautiful, so Baz is Jake and Eddie's best friend. Her full name is Sebastian Venkata Santhosh Kumar Sengupta, but short form Baz. And so Baz is their neighbor. She's a 78-year-old transgender woman. And of all the characters in Going to Beautiful, she was the first one, even before the book came out in bookstores. Of course, it had gone to reviewers and
Mhm.
marketers and what have you. So there was people who had read the book. And that's the very first character that people started to talk to me about is Baz.
Really?
So I knew very early on that she was going to be important for more reasons than why she's important to Jake and Eddie in the book. People related to her in a lot of ways because she represents a type of uh, struggle with um, who she is and overcoming uh, a lot of challenges in her life.
Hmm.
And people, I think, could relate to that. Um, the way she relates to the people in Beautiful is very unique. It's very different than how Jake relates to them. And actually, just I was at an event the other day, and someone brought up Baz again, as has been the case for the couple of years since the book has come out. And she said, she said the scene where there's a scene towards the end of the book where Baz is gifted this piece of clothing from the women of Beautiful. And it's a piece of clothing that brings together their Ukrainian heritage with
Hmm.
her Indian heritage. And I describe what this piece of clothing looks like. And it's meant to be, a bit of a representation of how we can all come together and things that may seem very different can really be beautiful together. And I think Baz represents that so wonderfully. As far as how she was to create,
Hmm.
probably my favorite character to work with. And again, it's interesting, Joe. You're kind of hitting on things that really do tend to be commonalities in my writing. There tends to be a character like Baz in
Okay.
most of my books. And the
Yeah.
genesis of that character is a woman that was in my life for many decades, and her name was Holly. I don't know if any of our listeners today know of an actress, Carol Channing, who's now
Of
gone, but
course.
for this larger than life, brassy blonde woman who just had this raspy voice and could tell these incredible jokes and had this incredible life. And Holly was my Carol Channing and just was this bigger than life character. There were these moments of great beauty and wisdom that would come from her
Mhm.
in quiet little moments. Even though 95% of her was loud and brassy and crazy, there are these very special moments that affected me for life. And
Absolutely.
having a person like that, I think, is so wonderful. And I think that's why I tend to try and create a character like that to help my main characters.
No, Vaz is so amazing for that. I mean, she has these moments that if you are a person who is lucky enough to have like older women and older people in your life at all these different like fundamental points. I feel like I was the kid who always had like 20 grandmas. And it's one of my like greatest fondnesses. And so there was something about her that while reading this, I just went, I know that out of pocket sentence or just that like that sense of comfort that you get. And and hearing you describe as having your own personal Carol Channing of sorts, it absolutely clicks into place, and that thread throughout a lot of your works. It's important to find people who ground us.
Mhm.
And I think it also is what goes back to, as you were saying, that all of your characters have that important circle around them. Uh, I also just like the blend of ages, no matter what kind of age you put your main character at, to give someone a few years to a few decades to no matter how you want to play it older, I think really gives a little extra something, and that best friend.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And it's, and this character isn't they're even though they're best friends,
Mhm.
this isn't someone who is a yes person to them. They
Right.
will tell you what you need to be told. They'll tell you the tough stuff, and they will be strong with you. But everybody needs that at some point in their life. And I like what you said about the age part, Joe, too, because when again, when this book came out, one of the things that one of the reviewers pointed out to me is she said, not only do you have a lot of, lead female characters in this story, but almost every character is 55 years or older.
Yeah.
And that's unique in contemporary Canadian crime novels. And it's and I loved hearing that because it's so much a part of what my why is, which is all about writing about underrepresented characters. And older characters are underrepresented. So it's so yeah, thanks for that. I love hearing that.
And of course, the joy of seeing a trans woman in her 70s, I think, is also important. I think we're robbed of that in the world, and of course, in stories as well. I mean, we have missing generations everywhere.
Yes.
Uh, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about location. I know you already shared, some of the love of Saskatchewan and beautiful, but the idea of a small prairie town where we're welcome to see life in stark contrast from Toronto. How did you go about beautiful? How do you incorporate the beauty of Canada as an American, as someone with knowledge of Toronto? And I mean, I'm in Cleveland, so I've been to Toronto more than my fair share, but my knowledge is limited, but I felt immediately so at home. How did you go about telling your location? Because it is essential to this story.
Yes, it is. I think first of all, I've always been a writer who I never want to write about a location and try and say to the reader, this is the best place in the world. I also never want to be a writer who would write about, let's say, Cleveland or Toronto and say, like,
Mhm.
that's the big bad city, but Saskatchewan is amazing. I
Of
think as someone
course.
who's been lucky enough to travel a lot, and I've been to Cleveland, and of course I've been to Toronto and all over the world, I have found something wonderful about every place I have been.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to communicate that one place isn't necessarily better than another. They're just different. And every place has something good to give and to show the world. So that's always been my first thing when I talk about locations. With in Canada, of course, it tends to be, the joke is that, Toronto is the center of the world, and the rest of us are just sort of here somewhere. And the thing about Saskatchewan, which is where I live, it's often called a flyover province. And, and you have flyover states, and
Oh, we've got them,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, it's a common thing. I think working with that, but
Mhm.
doing it with a positive spin is very powerful. And I like the idea of taking these, fish out of waters, Jake and Baz out of Toronto and plopping them into Saskatchewan, and not only plopping them in the middle of the winter, but into small town Saskatchewan. So I mean, as potentially unwelcoming as you could get,
Yeah.
and and then turning that upside down and showing that isn't necessarily the way it can be. So I love doing that. With Beautiful, in particular, that town and creating that town, I certainly did draw on places that I knew as a child. And of course, I was born in Saskatchewan. I was born on a farm near a very small little town called Prudhoe. And so there's certainly a lot of my hometown in Beautiful, and a couple of other small little Saskatchewan towns that I knew well as a boy growing up, and kind of melded them all together. Um, Towns or cities, any place, they're nothing without the people. So I think that's really important to know who you are populating these, your locations with. They are as much a part of the town as anything else, as the buildings and the structures. As this book was rolled out, probably one of the most common questions I was asked is, oh, I know where Beautiful is. And it's actually my hometown of fill in the blank. And after the fifth or sixth time, I started to realize they're right. Everybody has their own version of Beautiful. And when they read this book, they'll see things that are familiar. And it may not be the specific characters or the specific buildings, but kind of as what you said earlier, Joe, it's the feeling. And they get
Right.
that feeling and they realize, oh, this is my hometown. These are my people. And I think that's part of the reason why this book has resonated so much with people. Everybody either has a beautiful, or they wish for a beautiful, or they're looking for a beautiful. And I love that.
Absolutely. The other thing that stands out to me, of course, is the Ukrainian culture in Beautiful. How did you decide to incorporate this? It was very well placed for me as I was reading this. The city I live in is actually a little Ukrainian. Because we're divided into a few different sections here, but we have a very large Ukrainian population. And there were so many things I found myself going like, oh, I remember that celebration. I remember doing this. And so there was something beautiful about it. No pun intended.
Yeah, well, I mean, it all comes back to write what you know. And so
Yeah.
last name is Bidulka. That's a very Ukrainian name. And so that is, so much a part of who I am.
Mhm.
It's a big identity in Saskatchewan. Uh, as I was, navigating this journey of trying to figure out
Yes.
going from tragedy to joy, that is just one of the joys of my being brought up in a very Ukrainian household and experiencing all of those things that Jake and Baz experience. And it was really quite fun for me to do, because it's almost like, when people say that, how great it is to experience Christmas through a child's eye, because even though you
Mhm.
experienced Christmas, it was different. This was
Right.
almost the same way with me, as I was writing these things that I remember from growing up and go like, oh man, that was really kind of cool and interesting and quirky and fun. So it really started building on itself as I was writing the book. I think that, again, it ties so nicely to my why. And,
Mhm.
Ukrainian people in crime novels isn't a big thing. And
Oh.
so it just, again, really fed into the reason why I write.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, I want to go back to our marketing conversation for a minute here. Looking at the title and the cover of this book, can you talk a bit about how you came up with the title, going from your original version to where we ended up, and then, of course, how you landed on this cover design? I think cover is where the marketing brain comes back in.
Yes, yeah. Well, as far as the title, of
Mhm.
course, I had the long one, and even though for the longest time, I loved that title, and it was the
Yeah.
work title, and that's how it was, how the folders were labeled on my computer. But I knew in my heart that that couldn't be the final title. It just didn't. I mean, it might have. I'm still sort of
It's
thinking, oh,
tough.
I
I
wonder if I
know.
should have kept that title. But I knew it wasn't quite right. And as when I finally sat myself down and said, okay, Tony, like just think of some other options just in case.
Right.
And I, just put a piece of paper in front of me and just started writing possibilities. And the second going to beautiful landed on the paper, I knew because it it said so much more than the actual words. And I could imagine a scenario where someone walks into a library or a bookstore and sees that title, and they wouldn't know that beautiful is a town,
Hmm.
and they would read it in a whole different way. And I love the fact of people thinking about, like, how do you go to beautiful, and
Right.
what is beautiful, and what is your definition of beautiful, and how do you get there, and why do you want to get there? I loved all of that. And then as people start realizing that beautiful is a town, after they, are a chapter or two into the book, uh, it will switch their expectations. So I just loved everything about it, and that was an easy change for me. As far as the cover, no, I'm quite fortunate that I work with a publisher who does allow me input into covers.
Of course.
Oftentimes writers don't. So the process that at least we go through is I will, write this long description of what my thoughts are as far as cover concept, just things that I think would be important to pull from the book onto the cover. But primarily, it's again going back to what you said, Joe, it's the feeling. Like, what do I want people to feel when they look at the cover? And oftentimes that has to do with color and just the tones of color. And so we ended up, with this, as I don't know if people can see the cover, but
Yeah.
it's, various levels of blue and white that are meant to evoke wintertime. And yet, no, I didn't want people to look at the cover and shiver. I wanted them to look at it
Right.
and know, like, that this is probably a wintertime story, but that there's some warmth behind it. And then very small in the bottom right hand corner is, if you look close enough, what looks like a little house.
Hmm.
And it's almost buried in the snow in a way.
Yep.
And it looks remote, but still potentially welcoming and cozy. And so I liked that idea of people just sort of looking and thinking, so what is that? And like, why is that there? And is that beautiful, or is it something different? And people have had very different answers for that. Like, some people feel that that is the Kravchenko house. So Eddie's parents' house, which is out on the farm, that is their house, and that's sort of this desolate place where some horrible stuff happened. And other people just sort of see it that it's this cozy little corner and this lovely little place. Um, so all of that put together
Yeah.
made sense to me, and I also like the simplicity as well. I don't, I for me, anyways, I don't like the cover to be too crowded.
Mhm.
And I want to give the reader the opportunity to come up with their own ideas and to have their own feelings. And then you open the book and then you start in. And sometimes when you get to the end of the book, the cover may feel quite different. And I like that. I like there to be some ambiguity.
Absolutely. When I first looked at the cover, I was listening to you describe it now. I went, ah, good. Okay, my marketing brain is still working. I feel the winter. I see that. I see the small town. I see the remote. And you're absolutely right. The way that the meaning of what you first see and how it can change. I love that the wrapping is just as thoughtful as what's inside. When did you first start writing?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I was a CPA. That was my
Hmm.
career. I was working for a large international firm called Ernst and Young, and I was about 10 years into that career, and it was time to become a partner, and I thought, okay, this is now my life. Uh, and then I started to question that. And I thought I'd always had a passion for writing, like from being a young boy. And I think a lot of writers have that when they're young. And I just thought I was, reaching one of those milestone ages where you start questioning your choices and your life. And I thought if I don't do it now, if I don't take that risk now, I probably never will. And I did something which, may have been construed as foolish, but instead of, writing in my spare time or taking writing
Mhm.
classes, I just quit my job. And
Sometimes you
I
have to
don't
take the
suggest that
jump.
to everyone, but I knew myself. I knew that in my career, I was very busy. I was working 70, 80-hour weeks. And when I had time off, the last thing I wanted to do was sit in front of a computer again. So I knew that if I was going to try it, I just needed to jump right in and do it, full out. And fortunately, it's worked for me. I think I think the lesson from that is about passion. And if you have a passion for something,
Mhm.
maybe don't go to the extreme that I did, but find some way of making it part of your life and
Right.
figure out how you can just start investigating it. And for me, I I didn't particularly think that I was going to be necessarily successful. My measurement of success at that point is that I wanted to be, at some point, I wanted to say, like, boy, I gave that a try. Wasn't that fun? And I took those 2 years off of being an accountant and I just had a ball and tried to be a writer. Wasn't that great? And that first day after I left my job, I was just so excited to do that. And I was already successful that first day because I was doing it. And I as things started to develop and I started realizing like, oh, like this, as I got those letters in the mail to this horrible nom de plume that I was using and realizing like, oh, this could be something. It was, um, it was really powerful for me. And I started to change my definitions of success and what it meant to be a writer. And each step of the way that just changed. So very, it was a scary but exciting and fun time.
No, I love hearing that. I think that is so important. Just the idea of if your metric for success is I did what I set out to do, that it was just as pure as, oh, I don't want to think in 10 years I really wish I would have started, or what if I had given that the try. It was just if in a week I decide I'm done, I'm done, but I succeeded still because I can say I did it. I think that's so important. And we can all take that in our lives in so many of our pursuits, or just kind of that look for what should tomorrow look like. Now, when I say public library, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
For me, the first word is access.
Hmm.
I love the fact that we have libraries and that there is no barrier to entry. There's no like
Right.
nobody is restricted from going into this building and finding something that resonates with them or can teach them something or can just entertain them or they can, just try and find the books that they don't even know they need yet. So that's my immediate response to that.
Love it. Now, before we head into some of the questions that I've got piling up in a few different spaces here, what are you currently reading or listening to?
Yeah, I tend to read a lot of Canadian crime writers. So, Ian Hamilton, Louise Penny, Gail Bowen are some of my favorites. I love Alexander McCall Smith. I tend to really like to see what other people in my genre are doing. And, I think it's kind of fun to surround yourself with books of writers who are just better writers than you because they just make you raise your game and I love doing that and also just supporting crime writers and particularly the Canadian writing industry isn't as big as it is in the US and we're a small group of people and so I like that we can support each other in that way.
Absolutely. What is your go-to cafe order?
Oh, good one. I would say that it's a non-fat latte and with a double shot,
Of
just to get
course, gotta
a
be up.
bit of caffeine. And then probably my favorite dessert of all time, I'm taking donations, is cinnamon buns. They're a simple dessert, but man, just doesn't get better than a good cinnamon bun.
It does not get better than that. And what project are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I am currently working on the final book in the Mary Bell trilogy. So this is a trilogy that features, again, back to my why of, writing stories about underrepresented people in underrepresented places. The lead character is a character by the name of Mary Bell, and she is, I can pretty much guarantee you, the first and only female transgender private eye hanging her shingle in Saskatchewan. So it's the final book in that trilogy is called Home Fires Burn, and it's coming out this June. So we're right now, speaking of covers, we've been working on the cover images for that book this week.
Oh, that's exciting. How's it going?
Well, you're going to be sorry you asked, Joe. For the first time in my career, so this is my 15th book, and every time a cover image comes back to me, there's always something. And
Hmm.
this was the first time when it got sent to me last week, and I opened it up and I went, this is perfection. Somehow
Oh,
this beautiful designer, she just took everything that I said and she went in a bit of a direction I hadn't expected, but I loved. It was just the colors were perfect. It was just, I was so excited. And then
that's
I
what
showed it.
we can hope for.
Well, then I showed it to my husband, and so my husband Herb is a bit of a car guy, and there's an extreme close up of a door of a car, and his first comment was, "Oh, so the main character is driving a vintage car." I'm going, no, he's not. And he said, "Well, if you look here and if you look there, this is obviously a vintage car." And I'm going, "Oh gosh." So we're going to have to make some changes. But other than that, it was perfect.
You can go back with like, okay, I love what you were going for, but could we
But
update the car by 30 years?
yes, exactly. I'm sure it's easy.
Probably. Who knows?
Poor.
I don't design covers. So, one of our first questions here from Pete. Hello from Winnipeg. Loved the book. Was there a specific reason that you made the town of Beautiful so close to Saskatoon, 10 kilometers or so, rather than, say, 1 to 2 hours away in a more remote location?
Good one. Hi, Winnipeg. Uh, the reason that I did that is that in the book, there are a couple of scenes that take place in Saskatoon. And I wanted that not to be a big deal, that
Mhm.
they go from Beautiful to Saskatoon. I also knew that going back to my original title of, this beautiful Prairie Rainbow Retirement Inn, I knew that's where I wanted it to end.
Mhm.
And my concept for what that building was going to be and is at the end of Going to Beautiful wouldn't work as well if it was too remote. I wanted there to be that connection to people who could go to a fine dining restaurant, who could, support an LGBTQ camp, do all those things. And it just made a little bit more sense. Not that places that are remote can't have fine dining, but for just brevity for the book is the reason I did that.
Makes total sense. Pete also asks, any plans to have more of your books available on Libby slash Overdrive? This one's a question for me to answer, if you don't mind. Pete, your library is who decides what titles are available in your Overdrive digital collection. So we have so many of Anthony's books available for purchase to add into the digital building itself, so to speak. So, if you are looking for more of those wonderful books, send a note to your library, tell them what you're looking for, and they will very likely add it. You can also, in Libby itself, use the deep search feature. And if you hit the button that says my gosh, notify me. My it's lunchtime here and my brain went hungry, can't think. If you hit the
Cinnamon
note
buns.
exactly cinnamon buns, it's all that I'm thinking now. If you hit the notify button and add it to your smart tag, your library will get a list of like, okay, our patrons are looking for this book, this book, this book. So uh use that notify me feature in Libby and hopefully you'll see it added very soon. And thank you for your question. I've also got some questions coming through chat from Gabby, our lovely mod who is hanging out with us. She wants to know, not that I expected you to be exploring small towns in search of answers about your recently deceased partner on a regular basis, but have you ever solved or tried to solve a mystery in real life? And what fueled your love of mysteries?
Oh, hi, Gabby. I have not tried to solve a mystery in real life, and in actuality, I tend to resist being in those situations because I think people immediately think that if you write crime, that's what you want to do. You want to, solve crimes. You want to solve riddles. My mother-in-law was terrible for that. She kept on, wanting me to solve, giving me riddles and asking me to solve them because she thought, of course, he would love to do this, and I don't. Uh, to the other part of your question, as far as writing crime, it, as I mentioned earlier, it's not where I thought I would go as a writer, but as a reader, that was my love. Long before I started writing, I loved mystery novels, back to Agatha Christie.
Hmm.
And those were the books that when I even with my readers, when I picture all of you reading my books, I have this vision of you sitting on a comfy chair, dog at your feet, favorite beverage at your side, roaring fire, or on an airplane going to some wonderful location, or sitting on a beach. I have these visions of where you are, hopefully enjoying my work. And it comes from how I love to enjoy reading. And that vision for me is always with a mystery novel, sitting in one of those, beautiful locations, whether it's a comfy chair or on a sandy beach. And that all goes together for me. So when I first started writing something for fun, as I described earlier, it was a mystery. It was just sort of a non-brainer to me. It just sort of, I thought, if I'm just going to write for fun, let's write something that I enjoy reading. And then, big surprise, it worked out.
I mean, it goes back to the like do what you know or do what you find passion in, and it makes so much sense
Yeah,
that you're like, well, I love reading this, so why wouldn't I love writing it too?
yeah, yeah.
We have a question here. How are writers compensated by libraries, and is the amount adequate?
Ah,
Hmm.
that's a bit of a tricky question, but
Mhm.
from the perspective of writers and libraries, excuse me, there is a system in Canada which is really quite fantastic. And so once a year, I get a report, and what they will do is they take, and you have to, apply to make sure that they're doing this for you. But they will, I'll get a report that lists all of my books, and they have some elf or something, some magical being who is actually testing around throughout Canada how many times your book appears in that library. And I think the number is the maximum is 7. So if, say, Going to Beautiful has appeared in 7 libraries, I get a set amount of compensation for that book. And so, now I'm soon to have 15 books. So, I could possibly have 15 payouts for each of those books if they are appearing in libraries. So for people who are taking books out of libraries, I love all of you because I've been very fortunate where all of my books get hit the maximum amount of times each time. So it is a lovely bit of compensation for writers.
That's great to hear. And also on our side, as the overdrive side, um, it basically works directly through the publisher. So if you're also asking on the flip side, Well, Anthony's being compensated the same way that he would when a book sells in a bookstore, or it's a similar version to that. It just happens to be on the on the digital end rather than the physical end. So some similar sides there. But that's really cool to hear about that in Canada there is kind of a tracking system so you can see circulation, so you can see appearance. That's really neat, especially noting compensation on top of that.
Yeah.
Now, being a Canadian author, do you find yourself drawn to locations that you have only existed in? Are you focused on uplifting Canada? I know you've mentioned you are looking to represent the underrepresented, the locations that maybe aren't heard of. Would you do like a book based off of a trip you've taken, or do you like to stay in that zone of where you know where you've been, Canada only? Would you spread to different parts of the world?
Mhm. Yeah, so my first series, which is the Russell Quant Mystery Series, and in
Mhm.
each of those 8 books, although Russell was based in my home city of Saskatoon, in each book he traveled to a different foreign location. And each of the titles of the books gave some reference to that. So the first book in the series is called Amuse Bouche. So he's in Saskatoon for part of the book, but also in France for part of the book. Another book was called Date with a Shisha. And so part of the book, he's in Saskatoon, part of it, he's in the Arabian Peninsula. And I love doing that for a couple of reasons. One, it really married some loves of mine, which was writing about, writing mysteries, but also travel. I love travel and have traveled a lot. So each of those books and each of the locations he goes to are real locations that I have been to. And oftentimes the the details are straight from my journals when I was writing. So it's things that I did and restaurants I went to and locations that I saw, which was wonderful. From a writing perspective and from the perspective of my why and writing about the underrepresented, it was going back to something we talked about earlier, where I didn't want to present Saskatoon here and this other place here and decide which is better, but just the fact that they're different and both can be just as exciting. And from a crime writer's perspective, there can be just as many gory murders in Little Saskatoon than in, Vancouver or LA or New York. And and then the other side is that I wanted to present Saskatoon as that, new foreign exotic location. Like there's so many books about New York and Paris and Tokyo, but Saskatoon, no. So most readers have never heard about Saskatoon. Even Canadian readers, I mean, a lot of them have never been to this province. And
Oh,
so
wow.
suddenly, doesn't that make it interesting? So
Absolutely.
from my perspective, even though there's been a lot of pressure to write about places outside of Canada in particular, and to set books that way, it's really been a boon to me to write about Saskatoon. And then to add these other locations is just adds that great little color and comparison that I love to do.
Oh, I love that. I guess I know what I'm reading next now. I'm happy to hear I have a whole series to pick up.
Yeah, yeah.
No, that is so fantastic. And I love outside of your why also that purpose of balancing that there is not a, oh, we're so happy because we made it somewhere else. We're so happy because we're not here. I'm such a big sneaky proponent of that as well as like, well, it's what you make it. So everywhere can be a delightful place, and you just have to be willing to look for it, see past some of your own resentments and biases for back to the joy, like getting back to that really important part to come from.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony, I would be happy to talk to you all day, but I don't think I can. I need to go have like I guess I need to go hunt for cinnamon buns now. Now that
Yes.
you've put that in my brain, I'm gonna have to either find or make some, and we'll see what happens first. But thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing about your book and your career and for letting us enjoy this for Together We Read.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you and Gabby and to all the readers that joined us today. And I hope everyone has enjoyed Going to Beautiful because it was a joy to write, and I want people to feel joy when they get to that last page.
Wonderful. And before I let you go, is there anywhere we should direct folks if they want to keep up with you, learn more, see what's coming next?
Absolutely. So I have the website, so that's anthonybidulka.com, so easy to find. And if you want to hear from me, 2 or 3 times a year, I created, actually based on this book, it's called The Beautiful Bunch. And so just send me your email and where in the world you're from. And whenever I have something important to say, I will send you a little bit of a newsletter. But go to my website, it's updated often, and you can see what I'm up to.
I love it. Well, thank you, Anthony. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this book. And as always, happy reading.
Yes.